Right, let's jump straight into this explainer. We're looking at Dr. S.A. Hamid Hosseini's fascinating essay today, and honestly, it's a real game changer. We're going to explore how a 7th century revelation, an event most people just box up as a spiritual milestone, was actually a vibrant intellectual intervention against the kind of hyper-extractive capitalism we see today. If you've ever felt completely alienated from ancient wisdom because it's usually, packaged in these highly reductionist or rigid traditional ways, this analysis is going to totally reframe how you look at historical structural critiques. It delivers this radical ontology, which is basically a completely fresh way of understanding our existence, our reality, and how we're supposed to interact with the world that acts as a literal blueprint to dismantle modern monopolies. To anyone feeling increasingly isolated by modern capitalist culture, this perfectly frames the central paradox we're looking at. Seriously, think about it. How could an ancient, seemingly passive, mystical event happening inside the pitch-black, desolate Cave of Hira actually be a loud, anti-oligarchic structural critique? The reality is, the very first 5 verses revealed to humanity back then weren't just some quiet spiritual mantras or legalistic rituals. No, they were a massive, systemic shock to the system. And to really grasp why they were so shocking, we have to look at what that system actually was at the time. Because you see, pre-Islamic Mecca wasn't just a religious sanctuary. It was, effectively, the Wall Street of late antiquity. The ruling elites, the Quraysh, had totally financialized the sacred pilgrimage into this massive corporate hub. We are talking about highly organized, hyper-extractive trade, predatory high-interest lending, and a system of just relentless wealth hoarding, which in Arabic is called istikbar. In that society, your entire value was anchored to your human pedigree and your financial liquidity. The marginalized, vulnerable classes, they were completely locked out. So when a voice suddenly spoke in that desolate cave in 610 CE, it wasn't speaking into a vacuum. It was speaking directly and aggressively against this exact hyper-commercialized hustle.
So part 1, the intervention, deconstructing the first verses. Let's break down those first 5 verses that deliver this entirely new way of understanding existence. The very first word was Iqra. Now, commonly you'll hear this translated simply as read, but as Dr. Hosseini points out, we've got to deliberately dismantle these simplistic translations. Obviously, there was no physical text sitting in that cave. In classical Arabic, the root of Iqra actually signifies to collect, to gather together, to compile scattered fragments. It was a command to synthesize the exploited fragments of society, to read the cosmic book of nature, and to publicly, loudly broadcast a counter-narrative of justice. So what does reading the cosmic book of nature mean for us today? Well, it means looking at our environment, our labor, our society, and actually seeing how deeply interconnected they are. It was an epistemic liberation, basically telling people to stop viewing the world strictly through the extractive balance sheets of the ruling elites.
Then, the second verse drops, saying humanity was created from alaq, a clinging substance or congealed blood. Now, imagine you're trying to challenge an arrogant merchant class that genuinely believes their elite bloodline makes them the masters of the universe. How do you do it? You remind them that they started out as a clinging, dependent little clot. Meccan society was absolutely obsessed with genealogy and tribal superiority. They viewed the elites as inherently distinct from the impoverished masses. By reducing all human origin to alaq, the text enforces this principle of radical interdependency. It brutally reminds those proud merchants that literally no one is an independent master of the universe. We all share the exact same humble, dependent biological origin, literally physically clinging to the womb, the soil, the water. It just flattens out all social hierarchies in an instant. And then comes a really crucial point, the introduction of Al-Qalam, the pen. The revelation declares that God taught by the pen. Now, back in pre-Islamic Arabia, literacy, tracking stellar movements, drafting trade treaties, these were highly guarded monopolies. They belonged exclusively to the elite tribal diviners and wealthy scribes. So this single verse effectively decoupled wisdom from those elites. It mandated that education and knowledge must function as a horizontal, open-access public commons. It essentially weaponized the pen against elite enclosure, making knowledge a fundamental human right instead of a corporate trade secret.
Which brings us to part 2, the realization, the Medina laboratory.
Because of course this wasn't just theory. Let's look at how this radical ontology actually bore material fruits when the community migrated to Medina in 622 CE. They essentially established a living, breathing laboratory for a whole new civilization, and it powerfully contrasts the extractive reality of Arabia with this new Medina solidarity economy. Under law, exclusive tribal bloodlines were abolished entirely. They were replaced by the Constitution of Medina, which established equal citizenship and the rule of law across different faiths and tribes. Under economy, hyper-extraction was replaced by muwaqat, or fraternization. Think about the massive historical and emotional shift here. Wealthy residents were legally paired with dispossessed refugees to share their land, their homes, their tools. This was mandatory structural wealth redistribution. And in markets, rigged monopolies were completely outlawed, replaced by a rent-free, tax-free public commons where anyone could freely trade.
And they even applied this exact same radical ontology to this sacred environment, proving you could have a thriving society while strictly institutionalizing public goods. They introduced the concepts of al-Baqiyah and Hima. These were massive protected ecological commons. Inside these zones, private grazing and corporate-style resource extraction were entirely banned. This legally reserved vital resources for wildlife, natural vegetation, and the collective ecosystem. It was just an ancient, brilliant system of protecting the sacred environment from the very privatization and hyper-extraction that defined those Meccan elites.
That emphasis on the pen we talked about earlier, it actually built the material infrastructure of late antiquity. There is this fascinating historical anecdote right after the Battle of Badr. Literate prisoners of war could literally secure their absolute freedom simply by teaching 10 children how to read. Just like that, class-based illiteracy was erased. Later on, by acquiring paper-making technology, this foundational belief triggered a massive paper revolution. Wealthy individuals began establishing WAFs, which were charitable trust libraries. Honestly, you can think of WAF as the ancient version of the public internet, or open-source software libraries. Impoverished students could travel from distant villages, access vast scientific manuscripts, get free housing, and be handed all the ink and paper they needed, completely for free. Knowledge was fully democratized. But then we get to part 3, the loss, the imperial eclipse of wisdom.
Because, as we know, history is rarely a straight line of progress. To truly understand this, we have to impartially examine how this radical, horizontal experiment was, tragically, swallowed by the very imperial systems it initially set out to destroy. The early Medina experiment was built entirely on horizontal communal trust, but by 661 CE, with the rise of the Umayyad dynasty, governance violently shifted from a public trust right into an autocratic, hereditary kingship. As the Umayyad and later Abbasid empires expanded, they started re-enclosing the public lands. Those beautiful ecological sanctuaries and shared pastures we just talked about, they were transformed back into private crown estates, explicitly to protect the wealth, luxury, and power of military elites.
And this enclosure wasn't just physical land. Tragically, it was intellectual too. The state began using the pen as a tool for ideological containment. They established centralized, state-controlled Nizamiya universities specifically to train loyal bureaucrats. They effectively closed the gates of ijtihad, which is a fancy way of saying they shut down independent reasoning. This right here represents a devastating loss of that original radical ontology. They stripped Iqra of its revolutionary edge, replacing the vibrant, active, dynamic critique of the physical universe with the passive, rigid memorization of historical consensus. The pen basically went from being an open-source tool of human liberation to a factory for state propaganda.
Which leads us to part 4, resurrecting the radical commons. Bringing this all directly back to our reality today, we find ourselves facing a new crisis of the pen that intensely mirrors those enclosures of the past. The historical parallels are absolutely striking. Here, look at the Ottoman eclipse. To protect the economic monopoly of an elite guild of calligraphers, the Ottoman state effectively banned the printing press for Arabic script for nearly 3 centuries. 3 centuries! This caused profound scientific and intellectual stagnation. Now, look closely at our modern digital enclosure. Just as the Ottomans delayed the press to protect elite guild interests, today's massive tech monopolies use digital paywalls, hidden corporate algorithms, and proprietary AI to enclose human knowledge for private surveillance and profit. We are literally living through a modern enclosure of the pen.
So what does this actually mean for us? Well, the contemporary lesson of Iqra demands a transition from mere functional literacy to critical consciousness. Today we have billions of people who can mechanically read text, but we're suffering from a profound systemic blindness. We must actively synthesize the connections between modern corporate monopolies and the ongoing ecological collapse. We've got to stop being passive consumers of these extractive narratives. We have to critically analyze the modern institutions that are currently fracturing our cosmic balance, gather modern ecological and indigenous wisdom, and boldly broadcast an alternative, interdependent vision for the future.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Dr. Hosseini's essay clearly shows us that intellectual monopolies are just as deeply dangerous to our survival as economic ones. So take a moment and ask yourself, how will you read the world today? Will we just remain passive consumers of enclosed, privatized knowledge? Or will we use our modern pens, our code, our writings, our voices, to resurrect a truly open, radical, and equitable commons? Thank you so much for exploring this deeply fascinating material with me, and please keep questioning the narratives around you.